You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford, Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am super excited to have Allison Brennan on the show with me today. She has an amazing new book that just came out yesterday. It's called Cold as Ice. It is the 17th book in the Lucy Kincaid novel series. And if you guys are fans of thrillers like you know that I am, this is a must-have for your fall reading, and I'm loving it. So welcome to the show, Allison.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you, Allison. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
It was a long time ago. I had always been a big reader, and I read all the Trixie Belden and Nancy Drew books. And I said, I want to write something like this. I used to like, I guess what we would call fan fiction now. I would write stories about mostly Trixie because she was just, lived on a farm, and it was just really kind of totally different than my life. And I just loved it. And I remember just saying, that's exactly what I want to do. And my mom would get me big stacks of paper from Costco, which was called the Price Club way back then. And, be at the beginning of school, and I was so excited to get these stacks of paper, and I would just start writing stories on them that I never finished. And then when I was 13, I read The Stand by Stephen King. And because I'd outgrown, there was no YA literature when I was little. I mean, you basically went from Nancy Drew, maybe Paula Danziger or Lois Lowry, people like that, or Lois Duncan, and then you had to jump into Stephen King. And I sent him a letter through his publisher, and this was back in 1983. And I told him I wanted to be a writer when I grew up, and he sent me back a postcard and said, if you want to be a writer, write. And so that was basically it. That's when I knew that's what I was going to do.
So a couple of things. I think Stephen King has been a gateway drug for a lot of writers along the way. For reasons we could probably sit here and talk about all day. But the fact that he wrote a postcard back and, 83, Stephen King was a big deal even then. That's such a great story.
I think it was because I was young and I told him I was 13. And I think, I know that if I get letters, nobody sends me letters anymore. But if it's somebody that's a young person that emails me and says they want to interview me for their high school English class or whatever, I always get back to them because I know young people need encouragement, and it's so easy to discourage people. And sometimes no response is a form of discouragement. So I really, really, really try. And that was largely because he went out of his way. And I have a feeling that because he was a teacher and he believes in, young people, encouraging young people, that he, that's probably that's what I'm thinking my mentality is. I think if I wrote him today at the age of 50, he would probably say, no, you completely ignore me. But yeah.
Buzz off, lady. That's so I love those stories of early encouragement. Most of us don't have a Stephen King story, but that's it's one reason that I start the show off with the question that I do is because for writers, a lot of our life and our creative process is a lonely endeavor. It's us sitting in a room by ourselves with a computer or a notebook or typewriter or whatever your mechanism is, and it's just you and the work for a lot of times. So any of those little pieces of encouragement go a long way, and they really stick with you along the way. Did anyone else in your life, a parent or a teacher, someone close to you, recognize the storytelling gene in you?
I never really let anybody read my stuff. My mom always knew I wanted to be a writer because I talked about it all the time. So she always told me I could do whatever I want. And I think I had it in my head that I had to have a quote unquote real job first. And when I went to, college, I dropped out of college, but I double majored at one point when I was there for 2 years in literature and economics. And I was thinking, okay, well, maybe I'll be a teacher or maybe I'll be a journalist. And I took a journalism class and I hated it. And I took a bunch of other classes and I just didn't like it. And I ended up quitting college and getting a job. And partly I went to the wrong college for me. But so it was one of those things that I said, okay, I need to get a real job and then I can write a book. So I ended up working in the California state legislature, got married, had 2 kids. And it was when I was pregnant with my 3rd child that I realized how unhappy I was and how for some reason, it's like I had stopped writing, partly because I had kids. I'd stopped writing. I'd actually even stopped reading a lot because I didn't have a lot of time. I'd read to the kids. And then by that time I was exhausted and I just went to bed. And so it was like when I was pregnant with my 3rd child, I was 30 and a whole bunch of, I guess, oh my gosh, I'm 30 and I've done nothing with my life. That was kind of what my mentality was. So after Luke was born, I started seriously writing. And I basically gave up television for 2 years. And I think, my husband was generally supportive. I think he was a little bit frustrated because I wasn't watching TV with him, but it was the only time because I worked full time and I had kids. So the only time I could write was like 9:00 at night. Once I got an agent, he was like going, wow, you're really serious about this. And then I sold. And so he's been very supportive ever since, obviously, because I'm doing pretty well with the books and he knows I love it.
Allison, I love your story. And I think you and I are pretty close in age. I think I was probably 12 when you got that postcard from Stephen King. And I also have 5 kids and my wife and I, went through years of the weird looks from people when we would, show up to the grocery store or Sam's Club or something with 5 kids in tow. And it's an interesting thing to have a dream and pursue while all of this craziness is going on with raising a family and then raising a large family and all of that. Did you have when you began writing and when your 3rd child was born, your son, and you started on, did you have a story idea that had been nagging at you for a while, or did the want to write come before the subject matter did, or was there subject matter that had been haunting you for a while?
The desire to write was more, I think, prevalent than a specific story. I remember when I was on maternity leave with Luke, I actually took 4 months off because I had so much vacation time. I took 4 months off with him and I really didn't want to go back to work, but obviously I had to. I read a lot, and 2 books that I read, one was by Lisa Gardner called The Third Victim. And the other one was Iris Johansson's The Search. They had a huge impact on me. They were exactly the kinds of stories that I love to read and what I wanted to write, which were very, very dark suspense thrillers, but with happy endings or happy-ish endings. I mean, obviously, you've probably read Lisa Gardner. She doesn't.
Yeah. She's been on the show a couple of times.
I love her. I will read anything she writes. But she has like this dark style, but you always have that at least an ending that is satisfying, that you're going, okay, the bad guy got what's coming to him, even if all this other bad stuff happened to your characters. And so I really was inspired by those books.
There's going to be some redeeming quality at the end.
Exactly. You have to have an uplifting ending, even if bad stuff happens.
Exactly.
And so then I started thinking, kind of rejiggering what I was doing because I was kind of really more focused on mysteries in my head, because again, Nancy Drew, Agatha Christie. And then I said, maybe I'll just do it kind of this way to be more suspense. And so my first 4 books I wrote, they never saw the light of day. But they were all kind of romantic suspense, but a little darker, a little bit more like The Perfect Husband that Lisa Gardner had written, where you have that relationship, but you're still focused on the suspense. And then my 5th book, I kind of knew as soon as I was in the middle of writing it, I knew absolutely that was the book that was going to sell. And it did. That became The Prey. I just had that gut feeling that I can't even really articulate it. I just knew it had all the elements that I loved in a book. And I had finally figured out how to put them all together. Though I couldn't possibly tell you how I put them together. Sort of like my grandma cooking. My grandma was an amazing cook. She never wrote down a recipe. So we have none of her recipes. And it's like, that's kind of how I felt with that book.
Those 4 novels that you wrote that became your desk drawer novels or trunk novels, or, we have all these clever little names for the things that we write that never get published. Looking back on those now, can you tell what your growth trajectory was in writing those books? Can you look back and say, okay, I understand why this story didn't work or why this one didn't resonate with an agent or whatever, and I see where I grew through that process. And can you look back and see that now?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I would say that my biggest hurdle before I got serious about writing was I never finished anything. So when I actually finished that first book, it had a great premise, but I used every single suspense trope. It was basically more romantic suspense. I used every trope you could possibly imagine and then some. In fact, I think I wrote a blog about it. I'll have to dig that up and repost it because it's hilarious. Every single thing that you could possibly think of as being in a romantic suspense novel was in that book. And the fact that I got it all in 100,000 words amazes me. But I learned the biggest thing was that, yes, I can finish a book and tell a complete story. And that was something I was kind of worried about. My second book had a great premise, but really poor execution. I didn't quite know how to get from the beginning to the end in a coherent way. So it wasn't bad. It just wasn't great. But I took the premise and wrote a charity novella off the premise, which was the attempted assassination of a lieutenant governor of California. And I used obviously all my knowledge of California politics and the legislature to write that. So that wasn't a complete waste. I just didn't use the book. I just used the premise of the story. And it really wasn't a big enough story to fill up a whole book. And so each one of those, I think, taught me something different about my own style and how I write. And each book got better. My 4th book I wrote was completely different genre, though. It was a futuristic spy thriller. And I don't think that'll ever be published, even though it's really good. And I love it. I absolutely love that story, but it's so different from everything else I write. So
you talked about tropes of the genre, and that one book that you crammed all of the tropes into that one book. Now that you have a couple of books under your belt, and you're firmly planted in your genre, and you have readers that come back, for your ongoing series and all of that. Do you still think about tropes? Are those things that come to mind, or is it just so ingrained now? You know what defines the genre that you're writing in, and those boundaries are just where you live, so to speak. Do you ever? Is there ever a moment of like a checkup, with yourself? Am I doing this? Is this going to alienate people? Is this going to push the boundaries too much, or are you comfortable where you are?
I am comfortable where I am because what I love to read. I mean, I love suspense and I love thrillers and I love romantic suspense. I read widely, but Stephen King is probably the most non thriller I read, and I still think he's extremely thrilling. So I think for me, I kind of have a different view of it. In 2011 or 2010, I wrote a supernatural thriller. It completely tanked. And I love that book. But it really tanked bad. And so they had already had 2 books. Well, they had 3 books in the contract, but we changed the 3rd book to another Lucy book. So they published 2 books. They did not do well and I feel that my readers didn't like, well, I basically said they didn't want the woo-woo in the stories. It was the premise was the 7 deadly sins as incarnate demons that came to Earth. And I had a cop investigating a murder that they had no evidence for. The girl was just dead. They had the autopsy. I used a lot of the crime thriller stuff that I love, but there was also that supernatural element. And the premise was that the demons were there. And if they touched you, you didn't know who they were. They were, in other people. If they touched you, you gave into your deadliest sin and committed crimes based on your deadliest sin, whether it was lust or greed or whatever it was. I love the whole storyline. It did not do.
Was that Mortal Sin?
Mortal Sin was the 3rd book. I self-published that.
Gotcha.
Because I wanted to give my readers basically a kind of a conclusion. It was supposed to be 7 books. It ended up being 2. So I wanted to wrap everything up and give them at least a sort of happy-ish ending for my 2 main characters, and it was a cast. It was an ensemble cast. So that was original sin, carnal sin, and then mortal sin. So anyway, it was that kind of taught me that even though I love those books and I loved writing something completely different, that was still to me the same because it was a thriller.
Yeah.
That I need to really focus on the types of books that my readers want. And so when Lucy came out, my readers came back. Thank God they did. And so Lucy's done very well. And so I'd have to think twice about doing something completely out of I think the thriller world is a big world, but I think I'm going to probably keep it focused to the crime thriller, psychological thriller realm for now.
And I think everyone completely understands what you're saying. Original Sin, I'm grabbing that series for my Kindle right now. That sounds something that's right up my alley. I love that. Let's talk about Lucy for a minute. Where did Lucy come from? And at what point in the process were you when Lucy walked onto the stage?
Lucy was actually a minor character in a trilogy I wrote. My 2nd trilogy, the No Evil trilogy, introduced the Kincaid family. And Lucy was the much younger sibling. She was still in high school. So she was the much younger sibling of this family of like cops and forensic psychiatrists. And they lived in San Diego. There had been a tragedy when Lucy was 7. Her nephew, who was also 7, it was her best friend, her oldest sister's son, was kidnapped and murdered. And so you fast forward, and that murder changed the trajectory of everybody in the family and what they did in their lives. So I wrote a trilogy, and in the 3rd book of the trilogy, Lucy was kidnapped from her high school graduation. And it was up to the family to basically come together, even though some of them were estranged, to come together to find her and save her before she was killed. Lucy, I didn't know when I was writing it that she was going to be a series character. It was when I was reading the page proofs. And I had, the story had been put aside for a while, and I came back to it to read the proofs, and I realized how much I loved that character, and I wanted to bring her in and see what I can do as a survivor. I mean, she survives a horrific tale, and I wanted to build her up. So when I thought about actually writing a series character, I said, well, I'm going to do Lucy. I had to kind of fast forward her age a little bit. So everybody else aged chronologically. over the years between when I wrote the book, and then I doubled Lucy's time frame. So she actually aged 6 years when everybody else only aged 3, because I needed her to be old enough to apply to the FBI Academy. I needed her to, be out of college, things like that. So I just really fell in love with her character after I read the book again. And I wanted to have somebody who was basically starting the process. There were so many crime books, great mystery series, where you had a seasoned detective or, a cop that had been working for a long time, or an FBI agent who was near retirement. But you didn't have a lot of somebody that was just starting out. And I wanted to take her through that process. So I actually toured Quantico. I went through the FBI Citizens Academy. I talked to a whole bunch of rookie agents to see what their experience was, just to kind of get a feeling of what she would be going through. And then I wrote the first 6 books were basically before the Academy and during the Academy. I even had a murder at Quantico that I came up with the idea when I toured it, because they were doing a whole bunch of construction. And I said, oh, what if the scaffolding fell? And what if it was set to fall on somebody at a specific time? And I was like, because it was all over the place and you can't walk here and you're not supposed to walk. I came up with that idea just by seeing it.
The Novel Factory Online is software for the serious writer. With features like notes that are automatically organized, that means no more drowning in piles of paper, notes, or spending hours organizing digital folder structures. The Novel Factory offers clear, obvious structures for noting down information about plot, characters, locations, and everything else relating to your novel. Innovative features like the roadmap take you from concept to finished novel. The roadmap is an optional step-by-step guide to writing a novel that takes you from the premise to final manuscript and beyond. It draws on tried and true, tested theory that lies behind the majority of best-selling novels and blockbuster movies. Access your writing anywhere. The web version of the Novel Factory can be accessed anywhere you have internet. So you can write your novel on the train to work, while walking the dog, or climbing a mountain. Just log in and all your drafts and notes will be at your fingertips. Go to novel-writer.com to see how this powerful software can unleash your creative side. Use code HANK2020 for 20% off. That's the Novel Factory.
Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. PubSite is the new easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of 1 book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web.
Love that. Allison, I am fascinated with the beginnings of things, and I love to ask people about where stories begin for them, and what usually feeds a story. You just told us about that story about Quantico. Is that normally how things happen? Kind of a stray, event happens, and you start playing the what if game. Is it a character that comes to you first? Is it a setting? What usually sparks that? And here's an add-on to that question. Is that different when you're dealing with an ongoing series? Like we're talking about with Cold as Ice in the Lucy Kincaid series. Does the beginning of one of those stories begin differently because you know that Lucy's going to be involved? Or is it different for a standalone book or a different series?
I'll start with the series first. I think a series, the first couple books you write, you're still really developing the characters, and because you want them to be real people that if somebody meets them, they would say, oh, that's Lucy or that's Sean. So when you get deeper into a series, the characters are so real to you that you're just like coming home to visit them. And so you're not spending as much time on character development. The problem with that is you don't want them to be, one, you want them to get boring, but two, you don't want to constantly keep tragedy onto them where you're like going, oh my gosh, how much more can they take? So you kind of have to find that balance. So for the Lucy series, as you get further in the series, for me, it was coming up with plot lines that I can kind of pull through multiple books. So the first 3 books kind of had a more personal plot line with Lucy's growth and getting into the academy. The second 3 books, I said, okay, now I need to really focus on her relationship with Sean, and also as she's training and how, it's difficult when you're going through training. My daughter just went through the police academy last year. And, that's a strain on all relationships because you're doing so much and it's so intense. And so then the next section of books, when she got transferred to San Antonio, when she was a rookie agent, I wanted to come up with kind of this world in San Antonio. So that's kind of the San Antonio part of the story. And I was able to take subplots kind of through multiple books while each book had its own unique story. But when I come up with an idea, I hate to talk about a new series that I haven't even written yet, but I came up with an idea. I was talking to my editor, and I'm going to be doing a new series because I had a character in mind. She just came to my head, and I just absolutely knew I wanted to write about her. I feel like I know her already. And so it was finding the best story for her and her personality and what she is personally going through. Her son was murdered. And so she is at a different place. So she's a lot more mature than Lucy. And she has a lot different things. So for that, it came with a character. But then the series I'm writing for Mira started with the Third to Die that came out early this year. And then the next book comes out next year. I created it by saying, well, the idea came to me first. A serial killer who kills in 3. And then I said, oh, how would I solve that? You know what? Maybe I need to have like this team of FBI agents. And why would they come out from Washington to investigate this case? They don't do that. Oh, I'm going to create a new mobile response team. This is a rural area. And I came up with all these like layers on layers before I ever started writing the book. And one of the characters that I introduced in that story was never supposed to be a series character. And she's now running the entire series. She was supposed to be just in that book.
That's awesome when that happens and these things take on a life of their own, isn't it?
Yeah. I really felt it did on that one, especially because by the end of the book, I fell in love with her and I said, I don't know how I'm going to get rid of her. I had to figure out, and I didn't even do it until revisions, figure out how I was going to keep her in the series because she isn't an FBI agent. She's an LAPD, LA detective that was on administrative leave during the investigation. And my concept of the book was I was going to have, the main character was the agent in charge was Matt. I was going to have him go through some personal growth and have Carr realize some things. And then she was going to go back to her job and he was going to take on to the next case with his team of agents. But that did not happen.
Of course not.
So she's now part of the team. And I had a very believable, hopefully, reason why she gets to be part of the team.
Let's talk about the new book, Cold as Ice, for just a minute. Lucy, this is the 17th Lucy Kincaid book. Does it get more complicated as the story goes on to find new things to put Lucy and her, band of friends into? Or, the longer you write a series, does the world get so big that finding new ways to involve them in stories, it's sort of an endless proposition? Which side do you fall on?
I fall on the second one. I think that if you know your characters and you've built a good world, you're going to be able to come up with endless stories for them. It was funny because when I wrote the first 3 Lucy books, I was done with the third one, and I just sold it originally as a trilogy, and I wasn't sure I was going to continue the series. I go, I don't know how I'm going to come up with another idea. And then I came up with another idea. So every once in a while, I think, I don't know how I'm going to come up with another idea that's as good as the last one. And then I'm like, oh, I have one, So I think that when you have a world that you've built and you have these characters that and in Lucy's world, she has a partner, she has her husband. Over the course of the series, her husband found out he had a son he didn't know about. So now Jesse is living with them. She has a big family. Sean has basically become closer to his brothers that he was kind of estranged from for a while. So I got to build all of those relationships, but it's all based on also the plot. Kane was he actually still is a mercenary. He goes and rescues, people down in Mexico. That's kind of what he does for his living. So I could always come up with ideas. I had a short story where Kane was finally settling down, and he had rescued this girl from an arranged marriage who was 13 years ago. And now her father's coming back to enact revenge. And it was just a little line I put in one book about what he had done and why he couldn't go into a certain region of Mexico. And I'm like thinking, oh, that would actually make a good story. So when I was going to write this book for Kane, I said, I think I'm going to bring that storyline back because obviously the dad wants revenge. Right. So it was really a fun thing to do. And I have a lot of that. And that's kind of how Cold as Ice developed. Lucy put a teenage sociopath in juvenile hall when she was 16, and now she's out. And I knew based on the story timeline that she was going to be turning 18. I'm like thinking, what am I going to do when Elise gets out of jail or prison or juvie or whatever we're calling it? What am I going to do? Because she's going to want to go after Lucy. I have no idea what's going to happen, but it's going to be fun. And then I said, oh, what if she frames Sean for murder? And that would be fun because Sean is not going to do well in prison. And so then it all kind of came from there, that idea of what's going to happen when Elise gets out of prison. And the whole story came from that.
I love it. The book opens with a prologue that for 1 year ago. And it immediately you're a little off. You kind of take us off our balance with that beginning, and then from that prologue we go into chapter 1, and the story begins in earnest. But how important is it to you to nail that book opening to set a tone for the rest of the story? Because from that first page where we start reading, and you kind of disarm everything that I think I know about the series and the characters, and I go into it, shaken up a bit and not as confident in how I think you're going to tell the story. And you kind of classically do that by kind of knocking us off kilter with the beginnings of your books. How important is that to you to nail that beginning, and what does it do for setting the tone for the rest of the story?
Well, first, the beginnings are always the hardest for me. I write and rewrite the first 100 pages more than I do the last 300 pages of the book. And the beginnings are crucial. And sometimes for me, I just need to get everything down on paper, and then I go back and fix it. That particular prologue, and I love prologues. I know some people don't. I love them. I think they're very appropriate in most of the time. I've written them probably in more than half my books. That prologue, actually, I didn't write until I was nearly done with the book. And the character the prologue's in his point of view, it's only 4 pages. I originally was thinking of having that as a flashback scene because I needed to have a strong motivation. And then I said, no, this works much better as a prologue because it kind of sets up the whole story that Sean is the target. And it sets up that there is somebody that believes Sean needs to be punished for something. And so when he's arrested, and I think it's chapter 2 that he's arrested, but chapter 1's very, very short. When Sean is arrested, you immediately realize, okay, who's behind this? Why is he being arrested? Did he really kill this person? And originally Sean's arrest was the first chapter. So that's kind of why it feels almost like the first chapter. But I needed to set everything up so that it wasn't, all this other stuff wasn't coming out of left field, so to speak.
Allison, you say on your website that life is too short to be bored, and that's why you had 5 kids and write 3 books a year. In the state that traditional publishing is now, we typically see an author that writes 1 book a year. Usually, we're a year ahead in the writing. The book that comes out now has been probably finished for a year, and you're writing another one that will be for next year. And, this cycle kind of goes on. As someone who likes to write more than that, and do you feel like that the 1 book a year is an odd constraint to put on writers? Do you feel like people could and maybe should write more? Or how do you come down on that? That you're very prolific and maybe some people aren't as prolific. Is that something people should strive for? Is this just what works for you? What do you think about the working quickly as compared to the rest of the industry?
I think everybody needs to write at the pace that they're comfortable with, but they should focus on at least 1 book a year. I sometimes have read, things that, obviously if you're working full time and you have a family, you might not be able to do 1 book a year. I get that. But if you're like Lisa Garner writes 1 book a year, her books are great. I love her books. That's her process. She says it takes her about 9 months to write a book. I have a lot of respect for that. She has her process. It works for her. I am very comfortable writing 2 or 3 books a year. So like this year I had 3 books. Next year I'll have 2 books. It's really kind of fallen into 5 books every 2 years. That works for me too. I think you can write too much. I know a lot of self-published authors feel like, oh, I have to get something out every month or every 8 weeks or something. Some people are very capable of doing that. It's almost like a serialization. And if they're shorter books, like if I could write 8 40,000 word novellas a year because I love writing novellas, and it's a very, very focused story. You don't have to deal as much with subplots and things like that because it's a very focused story. So yes, it's possible, and I will never diss any author who writes a lot. I just think that you can go that sometimes you might want to spend a little bit more time to try to get that more meatier story. But if you're successful writing shorter novels and over, every 8 weeks, go for it. I think everybody has to figure out what's best for them. And so I found what works for me. And I think that if I was only writing 1 book a year, first of all, I know how long it takes me to write a book. I would not start it until I knew was the very last minute I had to start it to meet my deadline. Because that's the way I am. And I hate to say it, but I am very deadline driven. So if somebody says your book is due next year, I would say, okay, I can go and start that in June, and it's because it's due October 1st. Yeah, and then I will write something completely different. I wrote a standalone basically between books that I had already turned in, but I had no other books to work on. So, and it took me a year and a half, but I basically just wrote it in between all my other stuff. I haven't edited it or anything. But if someday I hope to see that in print because it is a thriller, so it fits in my genre. I think for me, I just am always going to write. I don't take a lot of time off. I get really antsy. I took 2 weeks off to move, and I couldn't wait to get back. I just, I moved from California to Arizona. So I was like, I got to get back in. I got to get back to writing. I can't stand to not be writing.
Love it. Do you have a daily writing habit? Are you the kind of person that needs to be in a particular setting for the words to flow, or are you a grab my laptop and write wherever I am kind of person?
I like to write in my office, but I can write anywhere. My first, 10 books, we lived in a small house with 5 kids, and I didn't have a den. I had basically my desk was in the living room. And as you know, when you have 5 kids, they can be very noisy because my younger ones were very little. And so I used to take my laptop and go to Starbucks. So I would probably say I wrote my first 9 or 10 books between Starbucks and a pub. There was a pub near where I lived that I absolutely loved, since closed. So if I was writing when the kids were in school or at daycare, I was at Starbucks. Then I would come home, take care of the kids, put them to bed, and then I would go to the pub after they were asleep. Mostly because I found it much more difficult to write at home, I think, because I was used to being in this environment. I'd put in my earbuds, listen to music, and write. Then when we moved and I actually had my own office with a door, which was really great, I adapted to writing there. But anytime I would get stuck, because I don't believe in writer's block. I do believe, though, that you could have like a story thing you have to work out. I would take my laptop and go to Starbucks for a couple days in a row just to kind of jumpstart the muse, I guess. Maybe I just needed more caffeine. And so, there's times. And then my kids all played sports. And as you know, with 5 kids, you can't always be home writing. So if they had practice, I don't have to watch them practice. I watched all their games, but I would go drop them off at practice, take my laptop. I'd write in the stands. I had my iPad too, which is I actually write more on my iPad. I don't even have a laptop anymore. And I could write in the stands while they're practicing football, soccer, softball, whatever it was they were playing.
Love it. The new book is Cold as Ice. It's the 17th book in the Lucy Kincaid series. We're going to put links to it in the show notes to make it easy for folks to find it, whether you prefer Kindle edition or mass market paperback. I believe it's coming out or it came out yesterday, or audiobook. You can find it however you like to consume books. We'll have links to all those things in the show notes. Allison, if people are just learning about you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, where can they find you online?
My website has a list of all my books and all the series, and that's AllisonBrennan.com, AllisonBrennan.com. I'm also very active on Facebook, which is facebook.com/Allison Brennan. I have an author page and I post there every day almost. And I try to engage with my readers. And then, of course, Twitter and Instagram, and all of those links are on my webpage too. So it's really easy to find me. I try to be responsive. I try to respond to emails and respond to people that contact me through social media, especially now because, people are sitting at home and it's like, what am I going to do? So I really try to keep in contact with readers.
That's fantastic. We'll put links to all those places in the show notes as well. Allison, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Do you want to get paid to write stories? Do you enjoy collaborating with other talented storytellers? Do you want to work completely remotely and set your own hours? Relay Publishing is looking for writers and editors to work on fiction projects across a range of genres, from thrillers to sci-fi, fantasy, and romance. The Relay process is extremely collaborative, in the same vein as a TV show's writer's room. If you're a story geek, then you'll be on a great team. There are 7 ghostwriting positions and 10 editing positions currently available. Please go to www.relay.com
www.recruitment.relaypub.com. That's www.recruitment.relaypub.com for more information on how to apply. Join a great storytelling team today. What Death Taught Terrence by Derek McFadden. Life is a journey. So is the afterlife. At the end of his life, Terrence McDonald must discover its meaning, or he'll be banned from the afterlife forever, and his soul will cease to exist. Join Terrence and those who love him on a poignant and unforgettable journey through a life at once wonderful and harrowing. Learn what Terrence learned. See what Terrence sees. By this provocative story's end, readers may even learn a thing or two about themselves. See why people are saying things like, Derek McFadden writes with an insight few can match. If you like the works of Mitch Albom, I think you'll find What Death Taught Terrence a worthy addition to your library, and the reading of it a life-affirming journey. I found the story immediately immersive, and it stuck with me long after I finished. What Death Taught Terrence by Derek McFadden, on sale now. Invasion Day, the first book in the They Came for Blood series by Scott Moon. David Osage is a dangerous man with a complicated past, but these days he's just trying to keep his head down, driving big rigs. One night he saddles himself with a hitchhiker, a nuisance who's more than she seemed, and that's when everything changes. No one was ready for an alien invasion. Death is raining from the sky, and the only questions left is, do you run, fight, or submit? For David Osage and his family, answering is as easy as giving the alien invaders the finger. Grab Book 1, Invasion Day, in the They Came for Blood series, and then follow it up with Book 2, Resistance Day, and Book 3, Victory Day. Available at Amazon.com.